So my little sister has decided that she might potentially want to get into sourdough as well. So I'm going to do a new round of sourdough tutorials. It's been, well, about a year or so since I last did a set of these videos. So let's start in with the feeding of your starter. So ignore any messes you might notice. It is just after the holidays. So first thing we want to do is put our current starter onto the scale, zero it out. Now some people would do a 1:1 to 1 ratio, so 1 part starter, 1 part flour, 1 part water. I don't do it that way. What I do is I take whatever starter I have and I feed it what I need for my dough. So I need 120 grams of starter for my recipe, so I'm going to feed it 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. Now I use a mix. I use a dark rye flour, 1/3, and then I do 2/3 of red flour. So since we need 60 grams of flour, I'm going to do 20 grams of dark rye. And this is just a little bit of, guesswork as we go. There we go. There's 20 grams of the rye flour. And my flour is not where it's supposed to be. Give me 1 second. Again, it's after the holidays. I took my entire flour bin to my sister's house so I could bake fresh bread on Christmas. So now we want 40 grams of bread flour for a total of 60 grams. Oops, too much. Close enough. Okay, now, because if I overdo the water, I can't take it out like I just did with the flour. I'm going to set this aside. And I just grab a water glass, zero that out, and I need 60-ish grams of water. Okay. Whoops. Now I'll set the scale aside, bring back the flour and the starter and add the water. And then I just use the handle of my spoon that I used to scoop out my flour. Just kind of dig down in there, make sure the starter is getting scraped up from the bottom of the container. Some people use mason jars, some people use taller jars. I like this bowl. Just because I know that this is large enough that I can actually do a quadruple batch of starter for what I need for my bread. Or if I just if I feed it and I don't use it, I can always just add to it without having to do any discard and just use that for a future several loaves. Okay, use a rubber spatula to scrape off the mix from the spoon, and then we just want to scrape down our sides of the bowl. Now this particular sourdough container hasn't been cleaned for a while, so it does have some dried bits. We're not going to worry about those dried bits, just the fresh flour that I got. Okay, we're just going to scrape that out, and there we go. There's our starter, freshly fed. When I go to bake with this, because it's well below the dots here, I'll actually grow it up to at least the dots. If I was doing a double batch, I would grow it up to the second set of dots, triple batch to the third set of dots, and so on and so forth. So you can see I can actually do 5 batches of sourdough in this for what my needs are. We're just doing 1 batch today. So there we go. That is feeding and caring for your starter. Next up, about 4 hours from now, 5 hours from now, we will do the first step of baking or making our dough for our sourdough. Sorry, it's me from a few minutes into the future. Once you put a lid on this, it can either be a warm cloth, a damp cloth, or just the container lid that it came with, which is what I use. You want to make sure you put this in a warm space. If your kitchen's really cold, if it's below 70 degrees, you can turn on your oven light, throw it into your oven. If you have a warming pad, you can put on a warming pad. Anything. You want to have the starter between 70, 75 degrees. Try not to go over 80 unless you're planning on baking in like 2 hours or less. Anything over 80, the starter will grow very fast. And so I like to keep it around 70 degrees if I'm feeding it for in a few hours into the future. If it's below 70 degrees, anticipate 8 to 10 hours before you can bake with it. But you definitely want to make sure it's in a space where you can let it grow at the speed you want it to before using. So, all right. Now the next time you'll see me, oops, I didn't mean to hit the camera there. Now the next time you'll see me is when we go to start our dough. All right, so if we look at our starter here, it's just below the dots. So we're going to go ahead and start making our dough. So let's just position it here. Okay, so we're going to start off. We need 350 grams of room temperature water. Now this is filtered water. You don't want to use straight tap water. Straight tap water will kill your starter. So we're just going to go till it says 350. 351, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to heat it up slightly in the microwave because this is filtered tap water and it is a little bit below room temperature. So I'll do that for 30 seconds. And while that is warming up, we're going to gather up our dry ingredients. So first thing is salt. You can use any type of salt you want. I just use regular table salt. And we want it between 16 and 18 grams of this. 17 grams, that's perfect. Okay. My water is warm, but we're not done putting together the dry yet, so we're going to go ahead and zero that back out. And now we need 500 grams of bread flour. Now, I buy this in a large amount. You can buy it by the regular bag at the grocery store if you don't bake very often. Again, we need 500 grams. And I'm almost there. And I went over. Perfect. All right, so now we're going to set that aside. Set the scale aside. And grab our water. Now, some people use dough whisks, which look like this, or some variant of that coil. I find these to be annoying because you're picking out a bunch of the dough in there. And so I've discovered just using a rubber spatula does the job. So we're not adding our starter yet. It's almost ready. We're going to add our wet and dry together and just mix this until we get what's called a shaggy dough. Now, in the past, I've done this where I do the starter in the water and fully dissolve it, and then let it sit and rest for an hour once all this is mixed together. But I recently discovered that this method actually works better. So, if we look at it, it's not quite fully incorporated. It's got these like little strands of dough, and those are what we're looking for. So I'm just going to clean off my rubber spatula. A lot easier than cleaning off that dough whisk. Okay, we'll set those aside for our next step. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wait anywhere between 5 minutes and an hour. Some people say it's best to do it for an hour. Some people say do it right away. I like to let this rest about 5 to 10 minutes before I add the starter. So I will see you in about 5 or 10 minutes for when we add the starter. All right, as promised, it's been a little over 5 minutes. I forgot to mention, cover it for that waiting period. Especially if you go for the half hour to the hour mark, you definitely want to keep it covered. One, to keep the moisture in, and two, to keep any floating particles in your hair, in your house out, in your air out. So here is our dough after about 5 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and add our starter. So we need to bring back our scale. Turn that on and zero it out. So here is our starter. If you look, you'll see a couple of little like divots here. That's where it's starting to expand its air pockets and they are bursting. This means that it's at its peak. Once it starts to collapse, it's past its peak, and you really don't want to use it at that point. You want to refeed it and go again. At peak or just at the tail end of peak is when you want to use your starter. So again, we're going to use 120 grams. So, and again, I fed this a total of 120 grams, so we will have just enough for our next starter when ready to feed. It's 110. It's a little over what I want. Perfect, exactly 120. So now I will mix this starter all back into a little pile in the center of the bowl, and then I'll fridge it until I'm ready to feed it again. Some people would feed it right away. Some people feed it and discard over and over again. I don't do that. So long as I'm getting a good solid dough out of this, I just keep doing this system. And if my dough does start to collapse a little bit, then I'll do that feed and discard over and over again. But for now, this is perfectly fine. We're just going to set that aside. So here we have our starter mixed in with the rest of our ingredients. We're just going to grab our rubber spatula again, and we're just going to fold it in. So rotate and fold. You will get some clumps of dry flour in there, and that's okay. If you had let this rest for like a full hour, you would hope that that flour has all been absorbing water. But because we did this just for over 5 minutes, it didn't fully get a chance to absorb all the water. And so now, once the dough kind of starts to be too stiff to work, which is about where it's at now, it's time to rest it. So I'm going to scrape my edges. Okay, I'm going to grab that small rubber spatula again, clean off my larger rubber spatula. You can use your finger if you want to. There we go. So now we have our dough base, and we're going to let this rest for 1 hour. After 1 hour, we'll come back and do our stretch and folds. So that'll be our next video. Join us for our stretch and folds. See y'all in a little bit. Hey there, so it's been just over an hour. So we're gonna do our first round of stretch and folds. So here's our dough. Oops, looking pretty good. Now, if you remember, we had this bowl that had our dry goods in it, our dry ingredients in it. We're just gonna use that bowl again. This time we're gonna fill it full of water. Now, this dough is very sticky. To prevent it from sticking a lot to your hands, it's not going to prevent all sticking, but it's going to prevent it from sticking a lot to your hands, we're going to wet our hands, okay? And make sure you especially get between your thumb and pointer finger, because that's where the dough wants to go a lot of times. This first stretch and fold, we're just going to do an up and over. And so we're going to reach down here, we're going to pull it up, and over. And we're going to do that at least all 4 sides of the bowl, okay? See how elastic it's getting? Now, some people would be done at this point. What I like to do is I like to come to the corners, and now we're going to fold it in. Okay? What this does is this helps us form a ball. Okay, now that's the third one of the corners, and it's getting to the point where I can't really stretch it easily anymore. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come to the fourth corner, and we're just going to fold it in on itself. Roll it in, tuck it in, and then fold it in half. And there we have our dough ball. Okay, so now we're going to let this rest. You can go from anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. I tend to go more to the 20-minute stamp, so that after 3 stretch and folds, it's been about an hour. And so we're going to do a different type of stretch and fold, similar to the second one here with our next stretch and fold. So I'm going to go ahead and press pause here on this video. You're going to see me in a second. I'll see you in about 20 minutes. All right, let's go ahead and do our second round of stretch and folds. The dough has rested for about 20 minutes. We get our hands nice and wet. So last time we did the pull up and over. So now we're going to do what they call coil folds. So we're going to pick it up in the center and just kind of let it drape and then flop. Drape and flop. Now, I don't find this one to be as effective, so what I tend to do is I tend to drape and curl. Drape and curl. Okay, so what we're doing when we do these stretch and folds is we're building up the gluten that really holds the bread into its shape. And then the rests kind of like let it relax and unwind a little bit, which then lets us kind of like build up that gluten again in our next stretch and fold. Now, this early in the stretch and folds, it's okay that as I stretch, this surface tension tends to rip a little bit. That's okay. Now, in our final stretch and fold, we want to try and prevent that when at all possible. Okay, so we're just going to put this back into our little dough ball, like I did last time, and let it sit and rest. We're going to do 2 more stretch and folds, and that's because the next one, we're going to do an inclusion, and then after that, we'll do 1 final stretch and fold. Now, if you're not doing any inclusions, you could stop after that 3rd stretch and fold. If you feel like you want to go to a 4th or 5th, you can, but I like to do 1 more for inclusions, and then 1 after that, just to kind of ensure that everything is holding itself together. So join me in a second here after 20-minute wait, and we'll do some inclusions. All right, it's been another 20 minutes. Let's go ahead and add our inclusions while doing our 3rd round of stretch and folds. So we're just going to be adding, if I can get it open, there we go, some pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds to this one. Now, I do my inclusions different than other people do. I put a little bit on top and I flip it over. And now to really get them incorporated into the dough, I'm going to stretch the dough up along the side of the bowl. Now, some people who do sourdough are probably screaming at me right now. And you know what? That's okay. They can scream all they want. And then we're just going to sprinkle this on. Now, if you're adding inclusions and you don't really know what the amounts are, you should never do more than 4 or 5 ounces of an inclusion. And that's because after that point, it's almost too much to hold all the dough together. So I like to try and stick closer to the 2 to 3 ounce amount of inclusions here. And you'll notice that this is pretty well incorporated. Like there's some seeds on every little aspect that I'm folding over here. If I thought it was a little bit light, I might sprinkle in some more with each fold. And now I'm just going to do a few other stretch and folds in the hope of getting all of the seeds under the dough. I don't want any of the seeds on the exterior of this dough. Okay. Now, if there are a few, that's okay, no big deal. But the point is to include them in the dough, not just to add them to the dough. Remember to keep your hands a little bit damp so that the dough doesn't stick to you. Now, you can stop here if you want. You can do another stretch and fold. It really depends on your dough. And honestly, feeling this right now with this inclusion, I think I'm going to be done. I'm not going to add any more inclusion. I'm not going to do any additional stretch and folds. So we're just going to leave it here and just go into bulk rise now. So bulk rise depends on the temperature of your house. This could be anywhere from 5 to 6 hours to a full 12 hours. What you're wanting to do is to get your dough to double in size. If it goes a little bit over or a little bit under, that's okay. A little bit over, you might have some large air bubbles, and it also might slump a little bit. A little under, it might be a little on the dense side. So your first couple of loaves might be like that, and just know that you need to watch a little bit closer during that bulk rise. So for the bulk rise, I'm going to once again cover this, and I'll put it into a space between 70 and 80 degrees. The higher the temperature, the faster the bulk rise. The lower the temperature, the slower the bulk rise. What you don't want to do is put this into the fridge yet. At this point, you should make sure you have at least 6 to 12 hours. It's 5 o'clock now, so if I go the full 6, we're looking at 11 o'clock for the 6 hours, or we're looking at 5 a.m. for the 12 hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the oven with the oven light on to generate a higher temperature without being too hot. I will put my thermometer in there as well, my digital thermometer, to monitor the heat. If I notice that it gets into the mid to high 80s, I will turn off the light but keep it in the oven, just so it keeps those temperatures in there. And I will monitor it over the next 6 hours. My goal is to do the next round, which is the pre-shaping and shaping, before I go to bed tonight. So that's the goal here. So follow along and we'll see that next video. We are done with the stretch and folds for today. All right, it is 10:30. It's been about 5.5 hours, but my kitchen has been very warm because I cooked dinner in here. So let's go ahead and look at my dough. All right. So if you remember, it was a ball down here, halfway down what you're seeing here on the side, and about that big around. So it's definitely more than doubled in size. It's definitely ready to go. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set that aside for a moment. I have flour in this shaker, so we're just going to shake out some flour here, just lightly. I also have a banneton here that we're going to flour up. Okay, we'll set that aside. Now, just like before, we're going to wet our hands. And I'm just going to, some people would pour this out. I don't care for the pouring, so I'm just going to reach in the sides, lift and pull, and then plop. All right. So, and then there's still some dough left inside my bowl. So I'm just going to grab a rubber spatula, scrape out that bowl just to get all the dough. There's still going to be some rising going on here, so it's not like I outgassed the entire thing. My hands are dry again, so now we're going to stretch it out. This is the pre-shaping step. We're just going to stretch it out here, laminate it out, get it as thin as possible. This is actually stretching very nicely. Now, if you don't feel like you have enough of your inclusions, this is a step in which you can add more inclusions. If you've ever seen sourdough that has a bit of a swirl inside the center, it's because this is the only time they added inclusions. I'm happy with the seeds that are in here. I don't want it to be overly seeded. So we're just going to leave it as is. And then we're going to do a tri-fold. So we're going to take this half and fold it over. This half, fold, not half, third, fold it over. That didn't quite work out well. And now we're going to roll it. And we're going to shape it. So we're just going to leave it here. I'm going to cover it. Where'd my towels go for covering? We'll just take this towel. We're just going to cover it, and we're going to let it rest for about 10 minutes or so. Normally, I would use a larger towel than this instead of just a hand towel like this, a washcloth. We're covering it so it doesn't dry out. We want the skin to still be a little bit of elastic. If it dries out too much, it will crack. So we're going to pause for about 10 minutes and we'll come back and we'll do our final shaping. All right, so it's been a little over 10 minutes. So it may not look too different. It has kind of like relaxed a little bit, spread out a little bit. So now we're just going to shape it into the oval shape here. So again, we're going to wet our fingers. There are a couple different ways we can approach this. If it's still kind of sticky, you could always use a bench scraper to flip it over. Some people just pick it up and flip it over. I can do it usually either way with my doughs. So we're just going to flip it up and over, and then grab it in the top corner here and fold these down. Push the center down. Whoop. Hands are a little too dry. Okay. And then I'm just going to scoot it back. And you always want to pull it towards you when shaping. Push away and pull towards you depending on how you're shaping it. Now, I don't want to shape it too roughly because there are the seeds near the surface and they're going to want to start popping out. So I feel like this is a good enough shape for what I'm wanting. So sometimes I'll put extra seeds in here so that it sticks to the dough. I'm not wanting to do that with this particular loaf. So let's just go ahead and scoop it up and in. Okay. Now, if this starts to separate here, you can kind of like pinch it up. Some people will do like a crosshatch pinching. My doughs don't tend to need that pinching. You can always attempt it with my dough, but it doesn't always hold. So we're just going to let it sit like that. Now it needs to rest in the fridge. So if I was baking this tonight, I could rest it in the fridge during the preheat process. Because it's almost 11 o'clock and I would like to go to bed, we're going to bake this tomorrow. So once it goes in the fridge, it can be in the fridge for up to about 36 hours, so I've been told. I've never gone more than 24 hours in the fridge. So this will go into the fridge. I will probably bake with this tomorrow morning. I'll obviously do the next round video with the baking process to kind of show you all of the different steps for prepping the oven and baking the bread itself along with that scoring. So we're just going to cover this with a cloth. Some people will cover it with a damp cloth. Some people will cover it with their plastic. I like that it dries out when covered with a dry cloth instead of a damp cloth. I was going to say a non-wet cloth. So I'm not going to use this washcloth because it's too small. I'm going to go get one of my normal covers I use, which is it's a cloth napkin actually. And it fits perfectly. If you have linen baking towels, those will work. Whatever you want. You want to cover this and put it in the fridge. Like I said, minimum the preheat time of your oven, which is about an hour. Maximum no more than 36 hours. So I will see you in the morning for our next round of baking. Good morning. Now we're going to go ahead and start the baking process of the bread. It is 10:30 in the morning, so the bread's been in the fridge for almost 12 hours. By the time it actually gets out of the fridge, it will have been 12 hours. So what you're going to need is a Dutch oven or a roasting pan of some sort that your bread loaf will fit into. And you want to put this in the oven during the preheating process because this is thick cast iron. You want it to be well warmed up before you put your bread into it. So you're basically creating a mini oven within your larger oven. This is what gets that nice crust on your sourdough. So we're going to put this into the oven at, for my oven, I do it at 450. My oven's relatively new, so it does get a little bit hotter. If you have an older oven, I recommend 500 degrees. Make sure your cast iron is measured for that high of temperatures. Depending on the coatings, some of them are only rated up to 450 degrees. So make sure you're keeping that in mind when choosing what you're going to be baking in. Now this is an enamel coated Dutch oven, and you'll notice it has some stains in it. Your sourdough will stain your enamel coated Dutch ovens, so keep that in mind. Are there ways to clean this? Yes. Do I bother trying to clean the stains off? No, I don't. This was bought specifically for sourdough bread. It will continue to be used for sourdough bread, so I don't care about the staining. Now, I also have silicone mats for my sourdoughs. You don't need these. You can use parchment paper. Parchment paper, in my experience, tends to stick to the dough, so I recommend putting a light, very, very thin coat of oil on your parchment papers, just so that it helps prevent it from sticking. The preheating process, you're going to be putting this in for longer than what the oven needs to preheat for. My oven usually preheats within 10 minutes at the 450 degrees. I'm going to put the Dutch oven in for at least 40 minutes. Some people use a full hour. Again, my oven is relatively new and gets very hot very fast. So I usually only go for 40 minutes. And about the 10-minute mark into the preheating, I will take the bread out of the fridge so it has at least a half hour to come up to room temperature. Some people will take it out for the entire preheating time. Some people take it straight from the fridge and put it into the Dutch oven. I've done that before. I don't really notice a huge difference, but as far as the shaping aspect, I like to keep it not fully at room temperature before putting it into the oven. So I'm going to go ahead and preheat here. Again, we want to go all the way up to 450 for my oven, 500 for others. You'll just learn what your oven likes. We're going to lid and all, because again, we're creating that mini oven inside the larger oven. Lid and all into the oven. And then in about 10 minutes, I'll take the bread out of the fridge. And when we come back, I'll show you scoring and placing into the oven. All right, so we're almost at the 40-minute mark. So I had taken the sourdough out. It's still kind of cold to the touch, and that's okay in my opinion. And so now we're going to put it onto the silicone mat, and then we're going to score it. So I usually just tip it right over. Ooh, we got some stickage there. Now, some people put more flour on their loaves before they score it to give it those beautiful white contrast to the separated dough. I don't really care to do that, so I just score it and keep whatever flour is on it. So I have a scoring knife like this. I've got a couple different ones, but this one is one of the better ones. It doesn't always lock in place, but you slide it up and your blade pops out, and then you score your loaf however you want. So I'm just going to do a score that my nephew suggested last week, and I really liked how it turned out. So I'm just going to do a couple of diagonal slices this way, and then we're going to do a couple of little decorative things inside my slots here. And then let's just okay. So there's my scoring for this loaf. So now we're going to go ahead and get out our Dutch oven. Out of the way. And we're just going to lower this inside. Make sure all of the scores are separating there. I just put in there. Okay. Perfect. Oven mitts back on. And we want to make sure we have the lid on nice and secure. So what's going to happen now is it's actually going to steam inside that Dutch oven with the lid on. That'll be what helps us create that nice crust on the sourdough. The color will come later. For the next 20 minutes, it will bake with the lid on, and then we'll take the lid off. Once the lid is off, it'll bake for another 20 minutes, and that's when we'll pull it out of the oven and see what we have. So I am not going to film taking the lid off because that's really all I do. So I will come back once we are taking it out of the oven. So I will see you in about 40 minutes. All right, so it's been a total of 40 minutes, 20 with lid on, 20 with lid off. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was that when you take your lid off, you might want to lower the temperature of your oven. Especially if you had it set at 500. So you want to make sure you lower that temp down to 450, or if you're at 450 and your oven's running hot, lower it down to 425. Now, I did not do that. I kept it at 450 because I like the way it crisps up the bread. Let me grab a cooling rack and we'll pull this out and look at it. All right. Now my Silpat has these little handles on it, so I can pull it like this. You can also just reach in and pull it out. So there is our loaf. The lighting's not great, but you can see the little artistic things I did in the straps. I really like how this is turning out. And because of the way I cook in my oven, I don't get burned bottoms. The way I do this, I prevent this, is I actually have a steel sheet on the bottom rack, and that deflects the heat and makes it more of a radiant heat instead of a direct heat, and that prevents a burned base. And listen to that. That's how you know your bread is well cooked, well baked. So, could you jump into this right now and eat it right now? Absolutely you could. It'd be very, very hot, and it would become gummy. So you want to let it sit for at least 1 hour to cool down, potentially 2 hours. If it's still too hot to touch, it's too hot to cut into. That's my general rule of thumb. But let it cool down for a little bit before you jump into it. And I just think that's a wonderful loaf right there. So there we go. There's our tutorial for sourdough. If you have any questions, by all means, throw them into the comments. Reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help. All right. We'll all talk soon. All right, so I'm ready to cut into this thing, so I figured I would do it on a video. Listen to that crunch. Is it still warm? Yes. Should I wait another hour? Probably, but I'm hungry and I want to try it now, so let's go ahead and cut into it. All right, here's the reveal. Oh, that's a lovely loaf. Look at that. Oh, it smells so good. Now let's give it a try. When cutting into sourdough day of, it's always the most crummy because of that crunchy crust. That is very good. Ideally, I would have waited another hour, but it's well worth it. So good.